So I actually wrote an article on Medium a couple of months ago, literally titled "The Scrum Master Role Needs to Die." Um, or was it the Agile Coach role needs to die? It was. I can't remember which one I used for the heading, but it was. But my point was essentially what you're saying, right? Is that Scrum Master is an accountability, and the HR job title you should have should be Agile Coach.
So it's not a question regarding with dysfunction mapping. Just we've had a few interviews within our podcast with interesting people. I just wanted to get your, I guess, story. How did you get into Agile and into this IT industry? Was it, did you go straight from university? Did you know that this is where you wanted to end up?
No, well, I kind of knew I wanted to be in IT just because I'm a tech nerd, right? So you might even be able to see behind me that I've got like a big gaming computer. So I've been building computers since I was like 13 years old or whatever. So I knew I wanted to be in IT, but I was a terrible student. I now know, I suspect strongly that I have ADHD, and I now know that I have autism spectrum disorder. Both of these were undiagnosed when I was in school. So traditional learning did not go well for me, as you can imagine. So yeah, I dropped out of college. I was working minimum wage, had no idea what I was doing with my life, but I wanted to get into tech. So I got a job in a call center, which eventually was the technology support center. Have you tried turning it off now and again? One of those kinds of places. And that was how I kind of broke into tech with no other idea of what I wanted to do. But the funny thing that happened to me was that I was logging tickets about these broken bits of software for this bank that I worked for, and I would occasionally have to go and talk to the different teams that supported these specific bits of software. And I would go and talk to this one team, and I would say, "Hey, there's this problem. People have complained that this thing over here is broken. Can you fix it?" And one of the teams would say, "Yeah, cool. Give us a couple of weeks. We'll take a look and we'll get that fixed." And then I would go to this other team with a very similar kind of problem, and they'd say, "Oh, well, we'll put it on the backlog, but it takes us a year to get a release out, and it costs $1 million, and we've got all these other things in our backlog, so it's probably not going to happen." And so I was very curious by this at the time, right? And I looked into it, and what I realized was, one of these teams is a Scrum team, and one of these teams is essentially a waterfall team, right? There's these two very different ways of building software, and they seem to be, having very different outcomes. Why is that? And so then from that, I did everything I could to try to get somewhere where I could learn Scrum. I got a job as an analyst in a Scrum team, eventually got my Scrum certification, and then just kind of from there, it kind of snowballed. But yeah, it all started because I saw a waterfall team, and I was like, how do I make sure no one ever has to work that way?
No, nice. And what do you think, if anybody today wanted to, from the outside looking in, wanted to get into the IT, what would you suggest is the best course of action? I guess the most efficient way of getting into the industry.
So I guess it depends on what you want to do, right? I think that's because IT is such a huge area, and for me, this might just be my privilege, I guess. But the answer is go with whatever interests you, right? Like I know that might not be as easy said as done, but if you don't enjoy what you do, why do it? Has always been my philosophy. So I've had a lot of kind of, let's say, low end jobs before I got into Scrum Master. I worked a lot of jobs where I wasn't paid a lot, but I always tried to make sure they were focused on something. So even when I was working minimum wage in a store, right, it was a bookstore because I liked to read and I liked being able to get a discount on books and talk to people about books. That was why I did that job and why I enjoyed it. And I think as long as you follow something that interests you and then try to gain as many skills and as much experience out of it for as long as it interests you, and then as soon as it stops interesting you, try and move on to the next thing using those skills you've now learned. That's kind of the pattern that I've always taken. And you kind of will slowly work your way up. It'll in a zigzag towards something that's probably going to be closer to perfect for you. I think that the best advice I can give to most people is, if you hate your job, find a way to stop doing it as soon as possible. Just do not get trapped in that cycle of doing something you hate just because you have to pay the bills. Because yeah, you do have to pay the bills, but somewhere out there, someone is willing to pay you to do something you love. So find a way to get towards it. And then I guess just to put a bit more, specific to that, if you're wanting to break into like Scrum Mastery, Agile coaching, get some basic analysis or test skills. You can do some online courses. You can, probably with skills you already have, get an entry-level analyst or tester role somewhere, maybe in a Scrum team, maybe not. But if you aim to eventually get into a Scrum team as a developer, essentially, not necessarily writing code, but in a Scrum developer sense, analysis, testing, maybe even UX design, all of those things will give you a chance to experience Scrum firsthand. And I think, like for a lot of us, that might be the thing that makes you think, yep, I'd like to do more of this. And once you've got that experience of actually being in a Scrum team, becoming a Scrum Master becomes much, much easier. So I do see a lot of people trying to break into Scrum Mastery without first being a developer in a Scrum team. And it certainly is possible, but I never recommend that as a path, because I think that's just too difficult. I think you should go with the developer route first. Not that you need to do it for a long time. And then, that's a way to break in. So again, two big answers there, but hopefully it covers it.
You hear that, Brad?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I was technically I was a developer, a business analyst for 6 months, and then stepped into a Scrum Master. So I guess that's kind of how I ended up.
Yeah, and it's all it takes, right? Because I did it for a year. I think it was maybe a little bit more than a year. And again, I'm not implying that people need to learn how to be like expert coders or any of that kind of stuff. But like I say, get in, understand how Scrum works a little bit, and you're 6 months to a year of that, and you will be in a really good position to actually talk about Scrum with a little bit more authority than just a 2-day workshop. So
yeah, I pretty much have the same view. This is how actually our podcast started, to help out people. We had a lot of friends. We had a lot of I guess friends of friends as well that wanted to get into IT, and everyone was like, how do I do this? How do I earn money? Or how do I, they immediately jump to the most appealing thing. How do I always work from home? But yeah, the idea is, and I love what you said, do what you love. And it's really important. And even if you get into IT, there's a lot of stuff in here. Like there's not just one role, as I used to think before getting into IT, because I started out as an actor and then went into QA and then went into development for a couple of years, and then functional analysis, and then Scrum Master, and then Scrum Master / Agile Coach, which kind of maybe the same, but also not. This is another.
It depends
topic.
who you ask, right?
Yeah. Do you wanna do you make the difference between them at all? Like,
so I give different answers depending on who I'm talking to be honest. So my non-pragmatic answer, so if I'm just being full honest with people, is no, they're the same thing. And the Agile Coach role exists because an organization has misunderstood what a Scrum Master is and then ended up with a big gap that they need to fill. And so they put an Agile Coach role in to kind of fill that gap. That's kind of I would say 9 times out of 10, that's where the Agile Coach role comes from. But yeah, it's the more pragmatic answer is that sometimes an organization is really stuck in a scenario where they don't have the skill set to get a bunch of Scrum Masters in a bunch of teams, and rather than just putting a bunch of stretch people across multiple teams in with no support, I can see where it makes sense to have people in called Agile Coaches that kind of help those Scrum Masters to do that stuff as well. And I mean, I currently am in one of those roles, right? So again, I have no problem with that. I think that I can, again, pragmatically see why the role exists. The one that I get very uncomfortable with is when Scrum Masters and Agile Coaches get separated from a kind of linear hierarchy, whereas the Agile Coaches are responsible for all the big important stuff, and the Scrum Masters, you're just down here with the team. I think that's probably a toxic way to kind of set things up, or at least to maintain it. And so I see my role when I'm an Agile Coach in an organization with Scrum Masters, my first thing is, how do I help these Scrum Masters to become better Scrum Masters? How do I show them what good looks like? How do I empower them to tackle those organizational challenges? But obviously I do that by leading by example, by doing the things that maybe they don't have the skills or the experience for yet. And it becomes a collaborative relationship, right, rather than a hierarchical one. So yeah, again, I don't know how much that represents the reality of a lot of businesses, but it's the way I tend to approach it. So
it's a nice way to approach it, to be honest. Yeah, I've seen the hierarchy and stuff, and to be honest, I actually agree with you. And I would go one step further. I would say that perhaps Agile Coach should be the role, and Scrum Master is just the accountability as you're joining that team, and not have Scrum Master as a role. But that's just my view on things.
So I actually wrote an article on Medium a couple of months ago, literally titled "The Scrum Master Role Needs to Die." Or was it the Agile Coach role needs to die? It was. I can't remember which one I used for the heading. But my point was essentially what you're saying, right? Is that Scrum Master is an accountability, and the HR job title you should have should be Agile Coach. But when you're doing that role as part of a Scrum team, you're on the accountability of the Scrum Master, and when you're outside of a Scrum team or working with teams that are not necessarily using Scrum, then you're an Agile Coach. So yeah, I 100% agree. And yeah, I think the difference between role and accountability is an interesting topic that Scrum only really kind of dug into a couple of years ago with the 2020 update, but I think a lot of us have had simmering in our brains for a while, and I think we need to get better to like helping people understand why it's better to not have Scrum Master as like a fixed job title, because it just limits people, right?
Nice. We're gonna look up that article and share it as well
Cool.
in our links. So yeah, thanks for that. I don't know, Vlad, do you have anything else before wrapping up?
Yeah, with just one question. How do you see the industry, the IT industry, especially in the last 2 years since COVID, evolved mainly into remote, and how do you see it evolving in the future? Especially now that AI is coming, is pretty much an inevitability.
Yeah, so I guess the two big parts to that, right? So the first part is that this is probably my most controversial opinion, and this is funny as someone who has maybe a lot of controversial opinions, that the one that gets me in the most trouble is that I think that remote working by and large is a mistake. I think it's a bad pattern. Now, that's not to say that it's not useful ever, or that it's not useful to some people, but I think the thing that makes humans uniquely great at creative work in particular is the way that we can come up with novel ideas when we get together and can rapidly share ideas. And I think that I would personally argue that the entire Agile movement was kind of based on that premise, right? The best way to communicate to and within a development team is face-to-face communication. I probably just butchered the exact wording, but it was in the manifesto. And for me, I don't think that's an accident. And yes, I think that video can be a good proxy. It can be certainly better than sending documents to people, but my experience has only reiterated to me that I think that a lot of people are kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And what I mean by that is we often conflate working in an office with working in that particular office, in that particular overbearing managerial command and control environment that we have seen a lot of, but that the Agile movement has been slowly trying to undo. And instead of trying to fix the office, we've kind of thrown it away, and people are now working remotely. And I think we've lost a lot of the really, really good stuff that comes from coming together in person and having real conversations. And then to the AI part of that, right? Like as I said, I think this is only going to become more important, particularly for creative endeavors, right? When it's, yes, we're going to be able to use AI to power up a lot of the things that we do, a lot of especially the more menial tasks that often just bore us, right? I think those are the first that are hopefully going to be shifted primarily to AI, but that's going to leave more time and space for the really truly creative stuff. And I personally don't, and obviously I'm not an expert on AI, but I don't think that we're going to see in the very near future that AI is going to really take on those really highly creative tasks in the way that humans can, and I think we'll continue to. So again, I think that to the part of, well, what's next? I think we're already seeing a lot of organizations trying to get people back into offices. I think, unfortunately, they're doing it in a really toxic way a lot of the time, where it's like just forcing people to be in an office rather than giving them reason to want to be in an office. And I think that's a problem as well. I don't think people should be forced. I think we need to just make offices better for people. But yeah, where it actually goes next, I worry that it'll be a big swing in that other direction, and people will just be forced back into offices, and it'll all get a bit shit again. I hope that what we'll do is start giving people options to align depending on their experiences, because to speak to my personal experience, after COVID, I realized that I hate working remotely. I would much rather be in an office if I can. But the last 2 years of trying to find a job where I can work in person with people in an office, I've not been able to find one. I've literally not found a single job where that's an actual option. You often get this hybrid thing where it's like, oh yeah, you can come into an office, but it'll be to sit at a desk and put headphones on and dial into Zoom, right? So there's no point. So in that case, yes, I would rather be at home. But if I could find a job where I could be back with a Scrum team or a group of Scrum teams that were just in office at least a few days a week, all together at the same time, and where we never had to hybrid and put our headphones on because one person decided they didn't want to come into the office today, I think that those teams would outperform the teams that never do that. And again, I'm not saying it has to be every day in the office all the time, but I think that the correct hybrid model is not where half of the teams here and half of the teams there. It's where we're all together some of the time, and then we're all apart the rest of the time. And I think that for me would be the good middle ground.
I personally am pro remote working. However, I do agree with you that it's not been necessarily, I wouldn't say that it's been a mistake, but in my perspective, we don't have the tools to properly work remote. We're trying to, it's a new environment with old tools, or using old tools. So we don't have the appropriate, I guess, home environment or tool set or to enable us to work efficiently together. But yeah, I've been in my personally, my productivity is quite high working at home, because I don't know, I guess I put in a bit of effort into arranging my workspace into a way that promotes productivity. But yes, I can definitely see how in the team that I work with, most people do struggle. Most people do struggle with keeping themselves motivated, and there's no less human contact, everything that you see. But I think that that's more of a gap to fill rather than just a problem that's always going to be there.
Yeah, and sorry, I know this could be a bit of a rabbit hole, so stop me if we need to go on. But I do like this topic. So the thing that I'm interested by is how technology might solve this problem, right? Because so an example, I recently got to try working in virtual reality. So I forget the name of the tool, but it's one of those Oculus things where everyone's in like a virtual room together, and that did a lot. It wasn't perfect, but it did a lot to solve some of the challenges that I have with working remotely, right? Which is you're all in a shared space, but you can actually talk as if you're in a shared space. So it's not like this where if one of us talks, everyone has to stop because we can't hear each other. In a virtual reality space, I can hear people depending on how far away they are. So these two people over here can talk, and I can lean in and talk to the person next to me, and I can whisper and I can say, hey, what's this guy talking about? And it feels more organic. And I think those sorts of tools might, if they become more mainstream, convince me that we could make this work. But the problem, like you say, is at the moment we're using Zoom and other kind of tools that just don't really do the job. And I think the thing that, for me, again, just the patterns that I've seen, I'm not saying this applies to everyone, but I think the trap that we often fall into is we think that because we can be personally productive when we're at home, that it's therefore the same. But I think one of the things the Agile movement has been all about is teaching us that actually personal productivity is one of the least important factors in effective teams, right? A team in which everyone collaborates and where we get really good feedback loops, but everyone is only utilized to 30% is going to be much better than the team where everyone's utilized to 100%, but never has time to talk to each other. And I think that's the trap is, oh yeah, I'm at home, I can bang out a bunch of code, I can write a bunch of requirements or whatever my bit of the puzzle is. But what we often don't have is a good way of demonstrating that we can actually deliver the outcomes, the value to the people that we need. And again, I would love to see some strong evidence to convince me otherwise, but all of the teams that I've seen over the last 2 years have really struggled to hit the same value delivery targets since moving to remote working compared to beforehand. And obviously there are many factors to that, but it's still a pattern, right? So
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be super controversial, but yeah, I do agree something along the VR that may help fix it. I do, however, have a lot of friends where most of my friends in IT actually prefer remote work. Right now, I'm in a remote setting, and it would not work any other way because we've got people all over the globe. So there's also benefits to that because a lot of people from different countries work differently. You get to perhaps experience different work styles or different cultures. There's positives in that, but I do agree with you as well because there's a lot of perhaps moments where you want to brainstorm something or anything that requires people getting together. And indeed, we are not. I think we're not there yet, but I think this will eventually force us to get there.
Yeah, I think the main point, right, is the genie's not going back in the bottle. Like we're probably not going to return to like a pure, everyone's expected to be in the office 9 to 5. And I think that's probably for the best, even though I'm quite against this current standard of remote working. I do think going straight back to where we were before would probably be worse as well. But yeah, like you say, it's the question is how do we navigate that middle ground? And for me, the reason I talk quite critically of the remote working as it is right now is because I think I see a lot of people that don't want to admit the flaws because it's convenient. And so, because I like to work from home and I don't like the commute, well, I'm going to just pretend that everything's perfect and better and great. And I find that, it's dishonest really. And I don't think everyone does that, but I think there's enough of that feeling that anyone who criticizes, remote working should be shamed, that it then stops the conversation from happening. So I'd rather kind of take the critical stance and then have people yell at me about why I'm wrong than just, not say anything and maybe it just gets worse.
So I'm actually wondering something. So I'm continuing the conversation. So again, hopefully this is useful for our listeners as well. But I'm wondering if you as an agile coach or as a Scrum Master within a team, does this kind of fall on you to also help the team realize that maybe you're not as productive in the remote setup? Maybe we should attempt a hybrid kind of work, or do you think this is something that a Scrum Master should look more into?
So I would say yes, and again, I know this is there are going to be people that would disagree with me on this, so don't take it as a right or wrong situation. But when I read the Scrum Guide in particular, and it's the Scrum Master is accountable for the Scrum team's effectiveness. That to me is a big and important line that we just often forget. And I think the more recent Scrum movement or what it's become seems to want to ignore that part, and it just wants to worry about facilitating events. And people are much more worried about talking about stuff and having retrospectives. Not that those are not good things, but I think that being responsible for the team's effectiveness is a really meaningful accountability. And yeah, I think one of the elements that has to come from that, just like the product owner being accountable for maximizing value, right? We have to be saying, well, are our practices having a negative impact on our ability to be effective, to deliver value? But the counterpoint to that, and again, this very much opinion, is I don't think it's on a Scrum Master or a product owner to direct the team and tell them they should or must do a different thing, or even really to strongly suggest that there's a better way. I think our job is to make the patterns transparent, hold people accountable to the things that they say and do, maybe ask powerful coaching questions to get them to re-examine the way that they are behaving and if it's actually useful. And certainly I would do that directionally, trying to support people to reflect on, hey, maybe we should get together more often. And I think it's one of the things that I commonly do with my teams is, at least when I was actively a Scrum Master in a team, I would just regularly, whenever a problem came up or we needed to do a workshop, the first question I would ask is, could we get together and do this in person? And 9 times out of 10, the team would say, nah, it's not convenient or whatever. But I would always ask the question, because every now and then they would say yes. And then often they would reflect on, oh, that was way easier when we did it in person. And so maybe next time they're a bit more likely to accept it. And unfortunately, those are the small steps we have to take because we're about creating self-managing teams, right? So we can't direct it.
All right. That was nice. Before wrapping up, I want to ask Vlad if you have any more.
No,
any other questions? Anything fishing related? Weather?
Just start going on through other rabbit holes. Yeah. No, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I really enjoyed it. Cheers.
All right. That was it for today.